that was not really a record. Someone served for a shorter period of time.
Yeah, actually, Jason Miller, it's a little obscure fact, Jason Miller was the White House Communications Director for 1 day. And it was January 20th to January 21st, and then he left because he had a personal issue which you could read about, which I don't ever bring it up actually in public because I try to shield him from that because of the personal issue that he had. But yeah, he was the White House Comms Director for a day, so he beat me. He lasted 1/11 of a mooch, which is 11 days. So I wish you an 11-day vacation.
But now 11 days is still, you know, a pretty short time. You were good friends with Trump. What happened? What went wrong? Let's start with that.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty well documented. There was an Italian-American reporter. I was, you know, I thought I was close friends with him. That was my mistake. His father had worked in the same construction industry on Long Island with my dad. They'd known each other for 50 years. And I thought I was on the phone with him having a conversation that was off the record. He said otherwise. He had recorded the conversation without my permission, but we're in a one-party state. It being, at that point, it was Virginia, and so technically it's a one-party state. And so he took the recordation of that. He wrote a sensationalized story. My friend Chris Cuomo then got him to play the audio of the conversation, and once you heard the audio, you could see that it was way less sensational than the way he portrayed it. He was let go from the job at the New Yorker. He was let go again from the Esquire magazine. He then got let go from Rolling Stone. So
what did he say? What did he say about your conversation? What was the specific?
Well, I had said, I don't want to bring it up because it was sort of inappropriate. It was very Long Island, New Yorkish. I said something inappropriate about Steve Bannon and so forth. But I don't really necessarily think that that was the reason I got fired. You know, I subsequently, the person who fired me was John Kelly, and I subsequently built a great relationship with him. He was my keynote speaker in May of this past year, and I brought General Kelly with me last week to Abu Dhabi, where he was also my keynote speaker at our conference in Abu Dhabi. So, you know, for me, I have no grudges. I don't even have a grudge against President Trump, and I think it's very important for people. I have 5 children. I did something that was fireable. I always tell young people that. Don't blame anybody else other than yourself when you're making a mistake. Own your mistakes. And so I openly admit that I made a mistake. It was a fireable offense. If President Trump or General Kelly decided to fire me because of it, I own it. But what I would also say is, because I'm an entrepreneur, you then have to wake up in the morning and forgive yourself. You can't get up in the morning and say, okay, let me kick myself in the pants. I made a mistake in the White House, so let me kick myself in the pants today. I don't do that. I just move forward with my life. But that was supposedly the reason why I got fired. What General Kelly subsequently said to me was that
General Kelly was fired too, by the way.
He was.
Big companies. Many, hundreds of people have been fired.
481 people have left the White House since my departure. Some have been resignations, some have been firings, and you know, it's obviously been a pretty high turnover White House, let's put it that way. But what General Kelly said to me, which, you know, listen, it is what it is, he said I was just getting a little bit too much attention, and he doesn't like television personalities unless it's his own personality. And so, you know, Mike Pompeo, who I'm reasonably close to, fellow Italian-American, known each other a long time, when he's getting too much press, he has a tendency to make a trip somewhere, and the 2 death knells with President Trump is, if he looks at you and says, you're getting more famous than me, that's a death knell. And then the secondary death knell is if he reads in the paper that you've given him advice that he's potentially used. And so he doesn't like that either, because he's, you know, there's no spotlights in Mr. Trump's universe, and there's nobody that can get any credit other than Mr. Trump, otherwise he gets pretty sore about
So
that.
tell us about a regular day at the White House, even if you're there for a few days. I mean, what happens? You meet with him in the morning. Does he have a regular schedule? We hear everything. You know, he gets burger at 6 o'clock and watch TV. He goes to bed at 8 and calls journalists himself. So what's the story?
So let me apply some context. And so, you know, that sort of a improbable life. My father was a construction worker. My family is from Campania, and they did not educated, and they came here in the 1920s, my grandparents on both sides. And so I come from a family of blue-collar people. There were no educations in the family. And even in my generation of Italian Americans, it's just me and my brother. I have 30 cousins, but it's just really me and my brother that were educated. And I live 2 miles from my parents, and so I still live in that sort of neighborhood. So to go from Tufts to Harvard Law School to Goldman Sachs to building 2 successful businesses into the White House, even if it's 1 day, 11 days, or whatever, it's a very improbable life. And so the reason I want to bring that up as context is that when I walked into the Oval Office the first time, I don't know if any of you have been in the Oval Office, but for me, I found it unnerving. I found it slightly intimidating. I found it unnerving. Here I am. This is where, it was built in 1909, and so it started with after Teddy Roosevelt. William Howard Taft was the first president to sit behind that proverbial desk. But there's a lot of history and a lot of legacy there. And so my first day in that office was the day I got the job. And I turned to the president and I said, Mr. President, my heart is racing a little bit the first time I'm here. Did you have that feeling yourself when you walked in here? And I thought this was an interesting answer, which shows you that some of the bluster about the president, is bluster. He looked at me straight on and he said, yes. When I first walked in here, I felt somewhat intimidated. And he said, but it was in that very week, I think Theresa May came to visit him, and he was in the North Portico entrance, and he was, the Secret Service was opening the door for him to greet the Prime Minister. He looked back at the White House, he says, okay, wow, I'm the American president visiting, head of state is visiting me, and he said it was a little overwhelming for him, even President Trump. But then he said, what will happen to you is the work is overwhelming, and you'll dial into the work, and before you know it, this will just be another office. And so that absolutely happened to me, even though I was only there for 11 days. 48 hours into the situation, it became an office environment, and it was itinerant with the stress of that. But something very different from my business experience. I've never met people like this in my entire life. In fact, President Trump said this to Leslie Stahl, and I laugh about it now. He said, geez, I thought that the real estate people in New York were killers. I thought they were very rough and tumble people. They're a bunch of babies compared to these people in Washington. The implication being is that it's a very weird thing for business people because in Washington there's no green team. What do I mean by green? The assault team. There's no money. And so everybody in our business community, we have a similar objective, we're trying to make money, we're working with each other to collaborate. In Washington, it could be, I want to sit closer to the president. It could be, I need this position versus that position. And there's a level of duplicity that is Game of Thrones-like. I said to somebody, it's like the House of Cards screenwriters got together with the Game of Thrones. It wasn't enough, so they brought the Hunger Games guys in. And all 3 of them wrote the screenplay for what goes on in terms of the intrigue and the diabolical activity. So I was a little taken aback by that. I didn't anticipate that.
Anthony, let's talk about the current political situation.
Yeah.
We are in impeachment week. What is your impression? People say that Trump may be reinforced by the impeachment process.
Yeah.
The Senate will let him off. We already know that. What is the strategy here? What is your impression?
I can only give you my observation, and we all have our strengths. And yeah, you can take my plate. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can only give you my personal observation. We all have our Achilles heels. We all have our tendencies sometimes to allow our egos to take over a situation. And I can say for myself, anytime where I put my ego and my pride into a decision, I have done something disastrous. And so what happens is your emotions go up and your intelligence goes down and you start to make disastrous decisions. And so President Trump's Achilles heel, my observation, is ridicule and humiliation. He has a very, very hard time with this. It's not just that he has a thin skin, because he does have a thin skin, but the notion that people in the G7 or NATO allies are laughing about him in a cocktail party, that is not something he can do well with. His personality is not wired for that, and pride will kick in. He leaves the NATO meetings early. the humiliation of being impeached in the House will be a very significant blow to his personality. And so, yes, the
Forgive me, let me interrupt you on that, because you know people say that, but in fact, you know, he's been discounted many times, and he's always come out as a winner. He knows already how it's going to end. So the humiliation is current, but he's fighting. He proved to be a fighter. So
you know, look, it can go any which way. I'm a money manager, so I'm at my best when I'm getting things wrong and I'm making an adjustment. Because in the money management space, if you get 60% of it right, you're going to get very rich, and then you got to figure out what to do on the 40% that you're wrong. And so I may be wrong about this, but the polling numbers are horrendous for the president. You can look at it any which way you want. You can dial into Fox News. They do a lot of mental gymnastics over there and figure skating. They're trying to pretend that an apple is an orange, and we can pretend that. But 54% of the American people want him impeached. 50% of the American people want him impeached and removed. And if you look at the data in the core swing states, there's obscure polls that show positive data, but the generic polling and the Real Clear Politics polling show an unmitigated disaster for the president. But he seems to be floored at about 40%. If he goes into the low 30s, and I predict that he will, I believe his personality, not wanting to be humiliated as the American president, running for re-election, smisted by a Joe Biden or a Michael Bloomberg, that he'll say, I made America great, and I'm heading for Mar-a-Lago.